Good evening, everyone. Now, we are looking into life with Jesus. We're running through the talks from our life series, and part of the way that we do that at life on a Wednesday night or a Thursday or whenever it is that we do it is we ask a question, and usually we have some charismatic person who's the MC, and they say, hey, talk amongst your table for 15 minutes. We don't have 15 minutes. What do people say is wrong with our world? Or, kind of the same question but phrased differently, what do people say is the solution for what's wrong with our world? Take, 30 seconds, chat to the person next to you, because then I'm going to ask you to actually volunteer some answers. So, go. That's 10 seconds. Got 20 left. Ten to go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, go. Hands up. Tell me, what do people say is wrong with the world? I've got one over here. Capitalism is what's wrong with the world. Thank you, comrade.
What happened after the aftermath of the Cold War?
The aftermath of the Cold War. Yeah, okay. I've heard the aftermath of the fall of the Ottoman Empire myself. That's a little bit of a history joke for you. But anybody else? Anybody? Come on. There's fighting. There's all this war. Yeah. Okay. Tell me.
We were saying it kind of depends on who you ask, right? Like, depending on where people live, what situations are happening in their life, they're going to say different things are wrong with the world, and people are going to disagree based
It's
on
true.
what they think
Yes.
is wrong or right based on their life experiences.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So thank you. That's helpful. And we are all going to have a different perspective. You are right. That's where I wanted to go next, was perspective. We have different answers based on our life experience, based on what's going on in our lives and where we are in the world and all of that. So here's a quick perspective exercise for you. What do you see? Somebody said duck down here. And somebody else said rabbit. So there's a feverish debate going on here by them just going duck, rabbit, duck. Who can see both? Who can see one but not the other? Okay, all right. Some people can only see one and not the other. Sometimes these kinds of optical illusions, they go, right now I see the rabbit. Oh, it's looking that way. Oh, okay. Sometimes it can be really hard to break out of the perspective. You're thinking, well, it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, and someone says, no, it's a rabbit. So today we're going to consider our own perspective on the world and what's wrong, but also God's perspective on the problem and the solution. So let's start with our perspective, and particularly we're going to start with our perspective of ourselves. Imagine that this ladder behind me is a scale of goodness. Absolute moral perfection at the top, the goodness of God, and evil at the bottom. Now, if there are 10 rungs on the ladder, where would you put? Now, I've asked these questions of 3 congregations and counting now, and I've got to tell you, this morning at Peakhurst, they were not brave. They did not give me answers. So you've got to give me answers, okay? Where would you put Anthony Albanese? 0 to 10. Whoa.
Far right.
Oh, off to the right of the ladder, okay? All right. Bang in the middle. So you're saying 5, because he's the Prime Minister, so we all kind of... But on the other hand, he put his hand up to be Prime Minister and to know that we were all going to look at him like that. So, yeah, okay. One more. No. Off the ladder, okay. All right. Where would you put Pat Cummins?
0.
He's the captain of the Australian cricket team, and yes, I am judging you for not knowing that. He called his daughter Edith. Okay, so 8 then. Okay, all right, sure. He's a good captain, but cruelty to children, sure. Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa. Does anyone know who Mother Teresa is? She was a woman who went to India and gave her whole life in trying to care for poor people in their sickness. So, a bit higher, a little bit higher than Pat Cummins, maybe an 8.5. All right. Donald Trump. Yeah, okay. All right. Now, you don't have to call out this one. You don't have to call out, so keep this one in your own head. Pick a rung where you would put yourself. Now, I am told that most people reckon about a 7. Okay, not perfect, not claiming to be perfect, but we all have a sense that there's good and evil, and most of us think that we are basically good people. Better than a 5. That's our perspective. But where would Jesus put me on the ladder? Now, I deliberately wore this shirt tonight because it shows you not that I ran an Ironman, but that I volunteered to help other people run an Ironman. I volunteered, I did good stuff. I was like handing out drinks and like energy bars and stuff as they went running past. I was like calling out encouragement to people. One woman, I completely wrecked her cadence because you could see their names written on the things, and I was like, yes, well done, Sally. And she was like, oh, was that a friend of mine? Just, yeah. But otherwise, I was really helpful. I think I've racked up some credits here. Well, sad to say, from God's perspective, I'd be right at the bottom of the ladder. And so would you. That is where he would put all of us. Now, it's natural to say, how can that be? That doesn't seem right. If my life was a set of scales, we'd all like all of the good that we do to outweigh the bad. Surely that's happened. And you probably feel the same way. I look around the room, there aren't a whole lot of rat bags in the room tonight. Surely we're not that dodgy. But Jesus says it's because we've misunderstood what true goodness is. So let's have a think about true goodness. What makes a good person good? Now, we already used our 30 seconds, so you're just going to have to call out answers. What makes a good person good? Selflessness. Okay. Helping others. Lovely. Selflessness. Helping others. Putting your trust in Jesus. That is the right answer. We're going to try and work out why that's the right answer. Thank you, Josiah. Well, Jesus got asked once, probably many times actually, what good thing do I have to do to get eternal life? How do I get eternal life? How do I become good? What do I need to do? And his answer was, do what God says. Keep the commandments. And one day he boiled that down. It's in Matthew chapter 22, verse 36, and his answer has 2 parts. See if you can see them. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbour as yourself. Now, when we consider what makes a good person good, we almost always think of the second half of that statement, the second command, the neighbour part, but almost never the God part. But that's the heart of the goodness issue. Loving your neighbours, great. You and I are made, we're designed to relate properly to each other, and I think most of us know that we're built for relationships. If you don't relate well, then a whole lot of the rest of life doesn't really work well either. But even more importantly, we're designed to relate well to God, to have God, the God who made us, as the centre of our lives. And the fairly sobering perspective of the Bible is that none of us have done what Jesus says that we need to do, to love God with all of our heart and soul and mind. And in fact, Jesus says something else is going on in our hearts. Now, most of us work pretty hard to present well, to come across as a decent, moral, good person, kind person, all that sort of thing. Okay, we've got our blemishes, but we'd say, oh, they've got a good heart. I've got a good heart. And Jesus calls our bluff. He says, well, no, actually, there's stuff going on in your heart that is the problem. It's what spoils it. He says, it's from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person. Jesus says that at the heart of our world's problems is the problem of our hearts, that they are evil by nature. And when he says heart, he's not saying that you've got a problem with your arteries and muscles and stuff. He's saying the core of who you are. That's where all those evil thoughts come from. Now, you might still be unconvinced. This is a bit of a mind shift for most of us. So let's think of this another way. Imagine I could put a GoPro camera, not on top of your head, like for this water skier, but inside your head. So that it didn't just record everything you did and everything you look at and every word you spoke, but more than that, it could record your silent thoughts and it could put words to them and it could uncover your motivations. Now imagine that I took the footage from your GoPro camera in your head just for the last week and I put it up on this screen for us all to watch. How would you feel about that? I think I would run out of the room screaming. I would be very ashamed. Because I know my own standards of what is good and bad. And I don't meet my own standards of what's good and bad. So if I don't meet my own standards, how much less am I going to meet your standards or God's standards of me? The Bible's perspective, which, if we're honest, I think we suspect might be true, says that actually we are far from good and we are far from God. And one day we will face God as judge and he'll find us guilty. We're on the wrong end of the ladder. We stand under God's judgment. That's the Bible's perspective on humanity. What's the problem with the world? Us. Now, ordinarily at Life, we would give you 5 minutes to discuss that among your table groups and talk about how you feel about that. Because it's a bit heavy, but we're not going to do that now. We're going to keep going. Because if we failed God, a lot of people think, well, look, God is loving. He will just forgive and forget. God is loving, but he can't simply forgive and forget because he is a God of justice. That is his character. We understand the importance of justice. We are outraged when injustice is done. Imagine if a man guilty of murdering one of your loved ones came to court and there was plenty of evidence to prove that he was guilty, and then the judge said, you know what, I'm a loving and compassionate judge. You may go free. Can you imagine the outrage? Can you imagine how the media would cover that? Can you imagine how you would feel? We would feel just angry. On what grounds can this guilty person go free? Now, we want justice done. We want justice served for the evils that are committed against us. But do we want justice from God? Do we want him to hand out the fitting punishment for the way that we have treated him? No, actually, honestly, I'd really like God to be unjust when it comes to me. Just me, not other people. So here's God's dilemma. Faced with our rebellion towards him, he either shows us mercy or justice. But the mercy would be unjustified because we don't deserve it. Or the justice would have no mercy because we'd get exactly what we deserve. Now, two things are true. God is merciful and he will forgive sin, but God is just and he will punish evil. So how can he be both at the same time? How can God, because he is good, be merciful and just? How can he forgive those who are guilty without denying justice? How can he punish us justly and yet be merciful? Can you start to see how just saying, well, he should just forgive and forget, it's not that simple? Well, the good news is that God has found one way to deal with this problem of our guilt. God has found a way to extend both justice and mercy. one way. We only need one way. And that way is Jesus. So this is what we read in Mark chapter 15, that at the age of around 33, Jesus fulfilled his life's mission when he died. He was abandoned by his own followers. He was rejected by the leaders of his own religion. He was scorned by his countrymen. The Roman official who examined him and found him not guilty then condemned him to death anyway, because that was just easier. He was whipped. He was led outside the city carrying a cross. Nails were driven through his wrists and his feet. He was lifted up on the cross and he hung there naked. And he was spat at and mocked. Ultimate shame. Excruciating pain. And it led to his death. And yet there was something far more distressing going on under the surface of that. Because as he came near the point of death, Jesus cried out his final words. And these final words tell us two important things about God, about the love of God and the justice of God. The words are recorded by us, for us by Mark in chapter 15, verse 34. And did you notice they were in the original language spoken? At 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus died, God forsaken. Jesus is feeling the full weight of the wrath of God, the righteous anger God feels towards our rebellion, and the justice that accompanies that. Jesus was forsaken because of those two things, God's love, God's mercy, and God's justice. God's justice won't allow him to leave evil unpunished. So in an amazing display of love, God took the punishment for sin upon himself in the person of his son, Jesus. Most people's view of Jesus is that he was a good man and he came to show us a better way to live. But that's not Jesus' understanding of why he came, of what his life was all about. He tells us in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, even the Son of Man, that's Jesus, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus came to give his life as a ransom. A ransom is the price that you pay to rescue someone who is captive, who is prisoner, who is stuck in a situation, a dangerous situation that they can't get out of. The debt that we owe to God, because we ought to be loving him with all of our heart and soul and mind, and yet we don't, that debt we owe is so great that only an infinitely valuable God is able to pay it. But it's our debt. It's a debt that only humans ought to pay. And so this infinitely valuable God becomes a man, Jesus, and dies in the place of guilty humankind. We live our lives ignoring God, and he dies for us. Paul puts it this way in his second letter to the Corinthians, God made Jesus, who had no sin, to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Now, let me explain that a little, and I'm going to use this prop. Now, my apologies, this is not a thick enough book, but let me explain very quickly. In a relationship, you know when you do something wrong, could be a little tiny thing, and it's just there. It's just in between you and them, and it just gets in the way, unless you actually deal with it. I want you to imagine that this book has a list of all of the things that I've done wrong. Every single time that I've thought the wrong thing, said the wrong thing, not done the right thing, done the wrong thing. It's all there. I apologise again, it's not a big enough book. But imagine this is me, and God is up there, and here is all of this sin blocking me from God. This sin stands between me and God so that I can't have the relationship with him that's going to meet my deepest longings, that Because of this, I'm separated from God's love and I'm going to stay that way. Now imagine this hand is Jesus. Jesus has no big, thick book of sin. In fact, he has no sin at all. Although he lived in the real world that we do and he was tempted all the ways that we are, he didn't sin. He always lived his life with God at the centre. And his words and his attitudes and his actions all reflected his love for God. Jesus has perfect, intimate relationship with God. And as he goes to the cross, Jesus takes this book of my sin on himself. He stands in my place, and God pours out the just punishment for all of my sin, with the result being that Jesus tasted hell, that Jesus tasted the wrath of God itself. It's really no wonder that Jesus cried out in horror that he was God-forsaken. But it was this act in history where God was demonstrating his love for sinners. God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It's been called the Great Exchange or the Great Swap. So let me wrap this together. Jesus' death affirms what we know to be true, that we are guilty. Our guilt is real and it needs to be dealt with if God is going to be just. But Jesus' death also offers what we want to be true, that we can breathe the fresh air of forgiveness, that we can be back in a relationship with God. So friends, God offers you this amazing free gift of forgiveness. Like any gift, it needs to be received, and that's what the next couple of weeks are going to be about. So I'll leave you with this question: what would stop a person from receiving God's free gift of forgiveness? Why wouldn't you say yes? So that's my question for you. If you have questions for us, and there's no dumb question, I don't know, I think I can think of dumb questions. No dumb question. If you have questions, you can use this code, this QR code, and by the amazing fandangleness of technology, you can get to the Slido web page for one event, and it says put in a question. You can put in a question, Stephen will see the questions, and he will ask Nigel and me those questions, and we'll do that soon. Are we going to give people a minute now to do that? Cool. And then we'll do other things, and then we'll have Q&A a little bit later. Cool.